بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين صلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا وإمامنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. So a few years back we did an intense, extensive, in-depth workshop on Ramadan and fasting. And then afterwards, there was a disciplet, a former disciplet, who took that workshop, transcribed it, sent it to me, asked me what I thought, asked me my permission for it to be published. I changed a few things, altered a few things, trimmed, cut, polished off a few edges, etc. And it was turned into a book or booklet with the same title, Ramadan and Fasting, based on the comprehensive Ramadan worship, Mufti Muhammad Ibn Munir. And alhamdulillah, there were some brothers and sisters who wanted to fund the project to make the book a waqf, an endowment for Allah's sake, and to be given out and handed out free of charge. And alhamdulillah, that is exactly what we did. Alhamdulillah, a few years back as well, I believe I was in Masjid Bayt al-Nasr in Pleasantville, New Jersey, in the outskirts of Atlantic City, and I had explained the entire book from cover to cover. Alhamdulillah. That lecture, that class can be found obviously on the channel. So we're not going to re-explain the book, or right now at least. We may re-explain the book perhaps this Ramadan and another time. But what I want to focus on, and what I want to place some more emphasis upon, I want to shed some more light upon the issue of the moon sighting and commencing the holy month of Ramadan and wrapping up the holy month of Ramadan going towards the Eid. Of course, you can't speak about Ramadan and fasting without talking about this issue, this vertebrae. So now we want to rediscuss this issue with regards to the moon sighting and all of the different ins and outs pertaining to the moon sighting versus the calculation, satellites, the telescopes, in contrast to what many people think and feel naively, or many people, they don't think and they don't feel this, but they just choose to, hide in the convenient cove of ignorance of politics, and how there are political influences for many of these different fatwa and these different rulings. And that's common sense. The country that sees the moon, what type of prestige is it going to receive? Monopoly, etc. So therefore, on page 10, the author, may Allah hide his faults, he says, moon sighting versus calculation. When is Ramadan going to be? Wednesday or Thursday? What do we do? Do we look for the moon locally? Do we look for the moon in another state but in our country? Is that still considered locally? Or do we go with the international sighting? And if we do go with the international sighting, then whose international sighting? Iran? Or no, we can't depend upon Iran. Okay, no problem. We go with the Gulf countries, Kuwait, UAE, Qatar, Oman, Saudi. No, we can't depend upon the Gulf countries because of this and because of that. Okay, no problem. Yemen. Oh no, we can't depend on, Egypt. No, I'm not dependent upon no Middle Eastern, Arabian, Arabic countries. They're this, they're that. Okay, Kenya, Chad, Niger, South Africa, etc., etc. What do we use? The websites and the different councils here in the United States or North America, UK, what do we do with regards to when does Ramadan start and when does Ramadan stop? And it's extremely important for us to understand that it's a two-way street. When the month begins, when the month ends. And this is also one of the arguments brought up by those who say that you can and should, or at least you can use the calculation, is that the calculation is used for the beginning of the fast and the end of the fast. When do you start fasting? Do you go outside on the rooftop and look for the true Fajr? Do you know what the true Fajr is? Fajr al-Sadiq from the Fajr al-Kadhib, the horizontal versus the vertical light in the horizon. Do you do that? Who's doing that today? Or are you looking on the prayer schedule with imsak? Another problem. 10, 15 minutes before the adhan, etc. When it's time to break the fast, are you looking into the sky? Does it have to be dark outside? When does Maghrib come in? When does Asr leave, go out? The rosiness of the sky. Wardatan kaddihan. When the sky is rosy, right? The sun goes away. What's meant by that? Or are people relying upon the prayer schedule, which is based off of the calculation and the satellite or the satellites, etc. So therefore, when does Ramadan begin? Just like when does Ramadan end? And that argument, as I said, is brought up by those who say that fasting is commenced throughout the day with the calculation, and we stop fasting towards the evening with calculation. Al-Muhim, we're not here to talk about that just yet. But the concept of it is not just sighting the moon for Ramadan, but it's also sighting the moon for Shawwal. Okay? Khairan, inshallah ta'ala. And the other matters as well, such as Hajj, such as a woman's menstrual cycle, iddah, she's, her cycle and divorce, etc., debts, how old is a person, etc. Okay, so the author, he says, it is an agreed upon principle to unite the Muslims as much as possible. So that's a qa'idah. That's not a hadith or an ayah or hadith will explain, but that's a qa'idah right there. Is that the Muslims have to unite, and the Muslims should try and strive their hardest to unite, to minimize their differences, to put aside their differences, and to come together. And of course, we know, without getting too dramatic, is that there are many countless shayateen of the jinn and of the humans who wish for the Muslims to be separated. Those within the boundaries of Islam or call themselves Muslims, and those on the outside who want to see the people remain split up and splintered. Okay? And there are many different misconceptions and fallacies with regards to unity. What it is and what it isn't, what it can and cannot be, which we can't discuss right now. What's important is we believe, and the qa'idah that we have is that Muslims have to unite. Yes, that's a fact. As much as possible. Number two, if this cannot be done, then at least the Muslims of one country. If all the Muslims in the world can't unite, then let the Muslims of a country unite. If all the Muslims in a country cannot unite, then let the Muslims of a city unite. And as I said before, that's a long discussion and argument with regards to unity and how people want the Muslims to be split up. And they'll mention so many different problems and issues: money, aqidah, race, age, sex, gender, ideology, school of thought, etc. Personal problems just to keep the people divided. Allahul musta'an. And he who wishes to tread that righteous path of unification, bringing people together, he will encounter many, many enemies and many naysayers and many detractors. Don't think everyone is going to allow you to just unify the people. Number three, if not, then at least one of one city, as I've just explained. And if not that, then at least one town, one village, right? At least this one town is united. Number five, 2 or 3 beginning and or ending dates of Ramadan for one town, city is totally unacceptable Islamically. 3 different Eids on 3 days in one city. That's uncouth. That's not cool. That's bad. 2 to 3 different Eids in one town, one state. That's not going to work. That's not good Islamic dawah for the non-Muslims to see the Muslims split up like that. It causes confusion with the ignorant layman 9 to 5 Muslims. And the list goes on. It's a problem. Number 6, where there is a Muslim ruler, this differing and fighting is removed. When there's one leader, and obviously this leader is supposed to be qualified Islamically. He says we're fasting on Wednesday. Khalas, that's it. End of story. He says we're fasting on Thursday. End of story. He says the Eid is today. End of story. And which even if a person believes other than that, he has to follow the ruler. And khalas, things are simple. Things are easy. It's not your burden or responsibility anymore. If the leader's wrong, if he's in mistake, khalas, you have to obey your Islamic ruler. Done. Moving forward. When the Muslims live as minorities, it is an obligation upon the leaders of the Muslims to stay as far away as they can from differing and fighting, which angers Allah and weakens their already compromised strength. It's already weak. Now you're weakening it even more. We're already a minority in this city, in this town, in this country. Now we're fighting and splitting up. We don't have a full body, but at least we have a hand. Now we're missing a thumb. And the pinky is weak, and the middle finger is, fractured. What strength do we have? The knuckles are shaky. You can't punch anything. So if the body is already weak, at least have a strong hand. Moving forward, this issue has been researched by many modern-day fuqaha, Islamic jurists, astronomers, and scientists, all three. Not just from the Islamic fiqh perspective, but from the perspective of astronomy and science. And that's because a great deal of understanding and learning and practicing many Islamic rulings depend upon secular sciences. That's a fact, such as the Qibla, such as ingredients and products in food, such as the different species and types of animals. What separates a goat from a sheep, a ram from a ewe, from a lamb, so on and so forth. Puberty, when does a person reach of age, so on and so forth. Let alone the modern day issues, DNA tests, pregnancy tests, sexually transmitted diseases, sexually transmitted infections, and having a test. You can now get married because the test was negative. Obviously, the test and its results depends upon science, navigation. And it's easy for us to, and if anyone was a skeptic or a quote unquote conspiracy theorist, it would be me. It's easy for us to say, oh, they're lying. Oh, this is not right. Oh, no, you can't say that, they're lying. But when you get on an airplane, how much questioning are you doing? This is a serious question now. How much questioning are you doing on an airplane? Are you arguing and saying they're lying to you about the flat earth, round earth? And I'm not saying anything about what I believe about the flat or round earth. Is the earth flat or round? That's not the discussion. But for argument's sake, someone is skeptical saying the earth is not round, it's flat, and they're lying to you. You can't trust them, you can't blah, blah, blah. But you get on an airplane, what do? Their navigation system, how they're flying is based off of their system or your system, right? So the point is that you have to take into consideration what people of science and these different worldly disciplines have to say, because a big part of your life is based off of that. All right, so we have to be honest with ourselves. So the Islamic fiqh, the modern day research that isn't based off of blind following, that isn't based off of a person ignoring the reality of the modern world. And of course, ijma' as one of, if not the strongest proof in Islam, consensus. But there are rules to ijma'. The ijma' has to be confirmed. It has to be established. It can't just be, there's consensus, but there's no consensus. Furthermore, the times of these different scholars quoting different consensus or different types of consensus, or they agree or this and that, did they live in our time? And you cannot just ignore this and say, oh, no, you can't say that. You'd have to say that. And the proof for that being is you go to make hajj on an airplane, and they did not make hajj on an airplane. Things are different. Many things are different. The time that it took to travel, the condition of traveling, the ease, all of those things have to be taken into consideration. Money being sent from one country to the next in a matter of seconds, milliseconds. The zakat, the sadaqah, the ibn al-sabil, all of these things, warfare. And what many scholars say that, obviously, they say you cannot kill someone with fire. You cannot punish someone with fire. But most modern types of technology, or the technology with regards to modern warfare, a missile. What does a missile do in most cases except burn you? It gets extremely hot. So does a person say that in modern warfare, Muslims cannot use missiles from jets and helicopters and planes and submarines and battleships, cruise missiles, etc., ballistic missiles. You can't use these things. It's a problem. So you have to take into consideration the modern issues. There's a must. Labut, there's a must. And that is to be kept in mind with regards to reading what this scholar 700, 500, 800 years ago said. We don't use the calendar. You cannot use the calendar, so on and so on and so on and so forth. And that may be true. That may be right. That may be wrong. Not the discussion here. But the point is, 700 years ago, they were not using satellites. 700 years ago, there were no lasers or laser beams. 700 years ago, there was no wireless data. There was no such thing as sending money from the west to the east in a millisecond. There was no such thing as a live stream. There was no such thing as this type of ballistic missile. It didn't exist. There was no such thing as an electric compass, so on and so forth. So there are many, many different technicalities that have to be taken into consideration. And if you choose to ignore them, then that's fine. But you're not being honest with yourself when you get on the airplane, as I said, because you're putting your trust and your reliance in their system and in their science and in their navigation. That is a fact. All right? Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. Moving forward. Number 9. They have come out with different results and various reservations. The fuqaha, scientists, people of astronomy, with regards to when you can and cannot see the moon. Is the moon accurately sighted in this hemisphere, in this part of the earth? Can we use calculation? Can we use satellites? Can we use telescopes, electronic telescopes, so on and so forth? What is the rule of having the different splintered Muslim states, which aren't even Muslim states? The inhabitants are Muslim, majority or most or many, and that's an argument in itself. With regards to people who do not pray and the widespread systematic abandonment of the salah in the world today, illa man rahima rabbi, except for the people whom my Lord has mercy upon, and the widespread secularism. It's unfortunate. You go around the Muslim world, it isn't an isolated situation. It's well known. There's a great deal of secularism and lack of deen. No musalla in the airplane, on the airplane, in the mall. In the airport, you go to this big, huge, gigantic airport in this supposed Islamic or Muslim country or Arab or whatever country, and they have a small, tiny room as the musalla. The airport is huge and have this small little slither of space to pray in. Not only is that disrespectful, but that just goes to show you that 9 out of 10 people in this airport aren't doing what? They're not making salat. They're not praying. Period. It's not a priority to them. And for those who hold the view that a Muslim who doesn't pray is a kafir, obviously that's a problem. Let alone the fact that, and not getting to any political things or issues of khawarij and khuruj and takfir, blah, 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 blah. All of the jargon of the people today and the fascinations and the obsessions that people have with these terms and these and this and that. But the concept of you're calling the government Islamic and the government themselves doesn't call itself Islamic. They do not identify themselves with Islam. They do not identify themselves as Muslims. They mention that the name of their country is Arab, African, this, that. They're not saying nothing about Islam. They're not calling an Islamic name. They're not identifying themselves with Islam. They're not calling themselves champions and upholders of Islam. They don't want to be called that. They don't want to be identified as that. They don't want to be boxed in as being Muslim or Islamic rulers, let alone fundamentalists. Why are you giving them names and titles, honorific names and titles that they themselves don't want? So that's a big problem. Okay? And all of these things have to be taken into consideration. Moving forward, point number 10. From them are those who hold the view that looking for the moon is mandatory. Ramadan cannot commence and end, as we said, except through the sighting of the moon. And it's totally unlawful and invalid to depend upon the calendar/calculation. Period. It cannot be used, and if it's used, it's batil. No discussion, modern day technology, satellites, missiles, none of that matters. And they have proof and evidence for that. And a Muslim who holds the view that you can use the calculation or whatever, he cannot shame these Muslims or disrespect them. For they are the default, let alone they have the argument of consensus, ijma' on their side. So you cannot disrespect them and call them blind or narrow-minded or old-fashioned or outdated, etc. La yajuz. And that's a big problem in fiqh. If you differ with someone, you have to insult your opponent. Shafi'i, Maliki, Hanafi, this and that. Laysa hakadha. You can't disrespect someone like that and make fun of a Muslim and mock and humiliate a Muslim. And most people are guilty of it. The people who call Muslims bad names, they themselves are guilty of the same act. Such as the whole Wahhabi argument. Wahhabi, he's a Wahhabi. Well, is it permissible to call a Muslim that? Is it permissible to make fun of a Muslim and to give him this derogatory name, Wahhabi? And you're claiming the Wahhabis split the Muslims up, broke up the Muslim unity, killed the Muslims, slaughtered the Muslims. What are you doing right now? And a sect and a group and a race and a country that you come from, how many Muslims did they kill? How many wars were there between India and Pakistan and Bangladesh? How many wars were there between Algeria and Morocco? Read the history. Read the history and you'll be shocked. How many times these Muslims or these countries and predominantly Muslims fought each other and spilled each other's blood in the name of what? Shirk, temples, trees that were worshipped, or in the name of dunya and a border. How many times the Syrians and Egyptians and these people and those people fought and killed each other and blew each other up with weapons from non-Muslims? So stop with your fake hypocritical ways. These Muslims are bad, but then you turn around and call Muslims names. These Muslims, they split up the ummah. What are you doing? I'm not praying with them. I'm not listening to them. I'm not following. That's splitting up the ummah as well. So as a wise man once told us, you have to be the change that you want to see in the world. You have to be the example of what you believe is right and wrong, instead of pointing the finger at others, blaming, shaming, condemning, slandering, and making fun of others. So never ever disrespect another view that you don't agree with. Never make fun of Muslims or call them bad names. And that's extremely common when it comes to the hijab. A sister who doesn't wear the hijab, and not only does she not wear hijab, I acknowledge that I'm sinful, but she tries to justify it with some nonsense interpretation. And what does she do with the sisters who do wear hijab and cover themselves? She makes fun of them. She calls them bad names. Oh, they're stuck in the past. Oh, they wear hijab because, her husband abuses her and beats her up. And her husband has 20 wives and 50 kids. And she's poor on welfare. That's why she wears hijab. They're closed-minded Muslims. Or they're extreme. How are you going to call somebody something because they don't take your interpretation, but you want your interpretation to be respected? And you want a progressive, liberal, modern, peaceful, kumbaya type of Islam, but you don't accept other people's interpretations and their views. And that is the essence of nifaq. That's the essence of hypocrisy and a triple standard, which a Muslim is to avoid. Wallahu ta'ala alam. Moving forward. From them are those who hold the view that looking for the moon. All right, let me explain that. Point number 11. Others hold the exact opposite view. Is that the calculation can be used. And some say that it should be used in our time. And there are different proofs and evidences for both arguments. Point 12. Others give detail when it is and isn't lawful and valid. Such as, i.e., they take a middle course path. They say, we don't say that you can absolutely use the satellites, the calculation, the schedule. But for sure, there are times in which you can use it. Or you should use it, or they may say there are times that you have to use it. And what are those times? And of course, those who hold the view, they are going with the default, the asl, the starting point, that you are to look for the moon with your eyes. That's an asl. So keep that in mind. A, when someone claims to have sighted the moon in a time and location in which the calculation says it is impossible to be sighted there, they say you must go back to the scientists and what they say. You have to go back to what it says because it's very difficult. You're going on an incline here. You're going uphill, saying you saw something, saying that you realized something that was very, very difficult to be seen in your location based off of that which they say is a scientific fact. So we need to double check and consult. B, the permissibility and validity of using calculation for Muslim minorities who cannot agree and find it very difficult. But this is only for the commencement of Ramadan and is not for its conclusion. Some say that because the Muslims are fighting and split up, they're allowed to agree on a day. But they say it can't be used for the end of Ramadan. And obviously that's a problem with regards to the Eid, right? Which we'll get into. Wallahu a'lam. Moving forward. Problems, inconsistencies, and contradictions raised by those who support the validity of using the calculation method. So those who say that you cannot use the calculation, we have to look for the moon, we have to go with the moon sighting. And of course, we didn't even get into the concept of looking for the moon. There are many issues of looking for the moon, such as, can you use a telescope or can it be with the naked eye? Such as local sighting versus international sighting. Is there more than one moon? Is there more than one phase of the new moon? The new birth? Is it impossible for Muslims to see the moon more than once in two different days? When they see the moon in Pakistan or Turkey or Malaysia or Mali, do we in New York City have to follow that and take that? Or do we say, no, we have to look for the moon in our own country, in our own state? As an example. All right. How many people are needed for the moon to be sighted and for it to be a valid sighting? One man or two? A man and a woman, two women, etc. What are the descriptions and the qualities that he who claims to have sighted the moon has to have? Masail fiqhiyya with regards to sighting the moon. Old and new issues, right? Okay. So as far as the counter argument on page 11, those who say that the scholars who absolutely prohibit using the calculation, they say that there are many things which are inconsistent and you're not holding up to your own values. Number one, the 5 daily prayers, which are the most important of the 5 pillars of Islam after the Shahadatain, are done using modern methods of calculation, which the Messenger of Allah ﷺ did not mention nor instruct us to use, but instead he told us to use the natural means of determining times of day and night, just as he told us to use natural means of looking for the new moon phase. Obviously, this is one of the strongest arguments that they present, and sometimes it's difficult to find a strong counter to this argument. It's not much they can say. Oh, well, the prayers are mandatory based off of the time, biwujudiha, yani, when the time is in. Well, how do you know the time is in except for you're using the calculation? You're not looking at the sky. It's not like you just, oops, I stumbled and, oh, it's time to pray now. Whether I saw it, whether I looked for the sun or not, but you're systematically depending and relying upon the calculation. Which of the two is more important and significant in Islam, fasting or salah? Of course. Point number 2, modern methods of calculation are a means behind unity and doing away with differing. Now, obviously, that argument can be countered. Some can say people may differ on the calculation as well. Scientists and astronomers, satellites, the websites, they say the new moon birth isn't there in Australia, but it is in Papua New Guinea, as an example. We saw the moon, or the moon is we're using the calculation in Dallas, but not in Houston. So just because they use the calculation doesn't mean that everyone is going to unify. And that's a long discussion with regards to the fake, false utopia that's oftentimes presented by different people of different agendas. Oh, if all the Muslims follow this one madhab, we'll have total unity. If all of the Muslims follow this one scholar, we'll have total unity. That's not true. That's a lie. There are different ways of differing, even with following this. But for argument's sake, the Muslims will come together and say, we're going to use the calculation and start fasting on Wednesday and then fasting on such and such a day. But that's not that strong. Number 3, the difficulty and hardship of knowing when the Eid is for Muslim minorities in Western countries regarding logistical planning for prayer services, celebrations, and taking off from school, work, etc. That's a big thorn in your side. If we want the non-Muslims to recognize the Eid al-Fitr, how can we go to them and say, it could be this day or it could be that day? It's a problem. We have to canonize it. right? Like Christmas is canonized or codified. No doubt about it. It's going to be on this date. End of story. But obviously that will lead us to other problems because it's not based off of the solar calendar, nor is it based off of the last Thursday of every month or the 25th of every December, etc. It's deeper than that, and it goes to show the concept of Muslim identity and the Muslims being away from the mushrikun and the kuffar and having their own. But that's a long story, beating a dead horse. Allahul musta'an. Moving forward. When do we book the rec room? When do we book the bouncy houses? When do we book the hotels? When do we book the park? When do I take off work? It's a mushkila. It's a problem. Then obviously one can say, look, man, for argument's sake, just book 2 days, class. Just take off 2 days, class. That's it. You won't have anything to worry about. But everybody doesn't have that liberty. Allah knows best. Moving forward. The hotel prices on Wednesday are extremely affordable. But if we wait till Thursday, they go up 3 times. That's a problem. Wallahu alam. Renting facilities, centers, and areas for prayer, feast, and amusement. We mentioned that. Point 5, the exact meaning of the hadith. Do not fast until you see the moon. What's meant by that? Sumu li ru'yatihi wa aftiru li ru'yatihi. Don't fast until you see it. Make sure you see the moon. Does that mean that you have to see it with your eyes? Or does that mean when you know that the new moon birth has come? With the proof that the end of the hadith says, فَإِنُ غُمَّ عَلَيْكُمْ. If it's cloudy, then make Sha'ban 30 days. And obviously you didn't see the moon. So how do you know that the moon did or didn't come? Except that you use some type of calculation, some type of pre-calculating of it. So some say that the Prophet ﷺ, he spoke to the Arabs in the language that they understood. And according to their customs and what was available, they weren't people of telescopes. They weren't people of calendars. They didn't read and write for the vast majority. So they used natural basic things such as eyesight. So it would only make sense for him to say fast when you see it, because that's what they used to do. And they say and they argue this hadith does not restrict the Muslim from using the calculation. Rather, the Prophet ﷺ told the Sahaba, fast when you know that the new moon is born. You understand? Seeing it or not. Some make that argument. Some scholars hold that argument. And Allah knows best. Moving forward. Number 6, this hadith being understood in the light of the hadith, we are an illiterate nation who neither write nor count. The month is like this and like that, i.e. 29 or 30 days, as I just explained. They say that the Sahaba, the Arabs, were generally, they couldn't read and write. So getting them to use something other than looking for the moon was just, impossible, or something which wasn't, it's very implausible. And that doesn't mean in our modern times in which the average person knows how to read and write. 9 out of 10 people today can read and write. So how can we now say you cannot use the calculation based off of what the Prophet ﷺ told the people that suffered from widespread mass illiteracy? That's a discussion in itself. The next point. Number 7, if the scholars and the Salaf of the past had the precise detailed science available today, would they remain upon the view that the calculation cannot be used? We brought up that issue. And someone could say, no, they wouldn't if they saw the like I said, the laser beam, the razor blade tip, the sharpness of the accuracy of the technology today, of GPS, that shows you the streets, everything in detail, the maps in detail, everything's laid out in detail. That's obviously a big if, and obviously, a if is a if. That's all it can be. We can't say would it wouldn't be. It's an if, but it's a strong if, a big if. Wallahu alam. Number 8, the calculation being used for all other sorts of Islamic businesses and dealings on a daily basis, such as iddah periods for divorce, age, marriage, birth, death, even Jumu'ah. We explained that. Point number 9, is the moon looked for and sighted for the rest of the 12 Islamic months, or only for Ramadan and Shawwal? How do we calculate the time? Number 10, modern calculations and Hajj times. When is Hajj? They sight the new moon and say this is the beginning of Dhul Hijjah, or is it already set in motion when it's going to be? Number 11, Muslim countries that claim to look for the moon but actually depend upon calculations. Like we said, the politics. And I'm not talking about one country specifically, so no one misunderstand my words. We don't believe in bashing and trashing people and, just spreading gossip and that. We don't believe in that negativity. But for argument's sake, is this country actually looking for the moon, or are they claiming to look for the moon? What remains of Islam and Sharia and the Deen in these lands, in these countries, with regards to the government and the system of government, the constitution? We're not talking about the mosques being open, which many people think and feel, oh, the Sharia is in the land just because the masjid is open, just because you can pray. Unfortunately, we have become fooled if we think that the Sharia is only prayer and only wearing hijab and not eating pork. And that's the Sharia. The Sharia is much more than that. Just like the Sharia is much more than just cutting someone's hand off. And the Sharia is much more than just beating someone who drunk or stoning a fornicator or a fornicatress. So once we go down that dark path, we fall victims of the negative smear campaigns of the kuffar, who say that Sharia law, i.e., is stoning a woman who had innocent love with a man. That's Sharia law. Sharia law is just, cut off their heads and that's it. These ignorant fools who don't know about their own religion, their own claim to religion. They don't know about their own history, and they want to make themselves experts about Islamic law and history. So we're going to imitate them and follow them when we start speaking in such an uneducated manner. Oh, this is an Islamic country. Why is it an Islamic country, Yahi? Oh, you're Khawarij, Yahi. You're from the Khawarij. Just to ask that question, you're from the Khawarij. You're the dog of the hellfire just by asking the question. What makes an Islamic country? Do you know? Have you read anything? What do the scholars that you claim to follow, what have they said? What determines an Islamic country? You know? No, I don't know. And I want you to tell me. Because you're running your mouth, I want you to explain to me. Go get out of my face, you're deviant. Go ask the scholars. That's all people can say. And many people, they think and they feel that just because the people have Muslim or Islamic traditions and culture, is that an Islamic country and a Sharia country. And that's wrong. We have to look at the government, the system of government, the constitution. What do they say? What do they practice? Let's walk in their courtrooms. Let's look at the finance, the economics, and the list goes on. And it doesn't mean that a country has to be perfect to be an Islamic or Muslim country or Sharia country. It doesn't mean that perfection. Is that there's nothing that's wrong or a mistake or corruption. That's another mistake, and that's another type of extremism on the other side. Okay, so be mindful of what you say, and no one knows you're a fool until you open your mouth and announce it. Moving forward. The etiquette of differing and respecting other legitimate views, as we explained. Adabu khilaf. B, looking and considering the bigger picture of Islam and to be a Muslim. The bigger picture versus the smaller picture. Modern day fiqh issues of fasting. Now, all of these things aren't pertaining to the sighting of the moon or the calculation, but some things are important. Number one, traditional Islamic jurisprudence blended with modern day science, technology, and culture and politics, as we explained. The traditional fiqh, the four madhabs, the ulama, the athar, the text, the fiqh books, along with light with airplanes, satellites, cell phones, data, along with the concept of back in the time of Sheikh Islam ibn Taymiyyah or Imam Abu Hanifa or this one or that one, there was no, carved up Middle East. It didn't exist. There was no such thing as this country. There was no border here. There was no such thing as this systematic nationalism. I'm Turkish. I'm Saudi. I'm from Syria. I'm Egyptian. I'm Algerian. I'm Moroccan. I'm Tunisian. I come from this land instead of I'm a Muslim. Or a person just saying I'm Arab or I'm African. No, I'm from this country. Right? Did that exist back then? And the culture of nationalism and separation. Allahumma musta'an. East meets West. Right? The East meeting the West. The good, the bad, and the ugly of that meeting. Caliphate versus secular Islam, like we just explained. No one source, no unified source. Muslim majorities versus Muslim minorities. We're poor or weak in this country versus we're strong and we're the majority in another. Legal maxims versus specific proof and evidence. This is a qaida versus this specific hadith. We're going to implement this hadith but ignore the qaida. We're going to implement the qaida but ignore the specific hadith. And you have no way of figuring out what's right and wrong from this unless you have Islamic knowledge. Necessity, need, hardship, and perfection. You get in the hotel or the pool or the kitchen for this day. It isn't a need, nor is it a necessity. It just makes things better and easier. It's perfection. You don't need it. You save a little bit of money. You don't need it. You getting off this day specifically of work ahead of time is not a necessity. You could have 2 days. You can call at the last minute. You can tell your boss that I have to find out after Maghrib, etc. It's not a need. So you never break the rules or go against the rules or go against the default unless it's a need or a necessity, not a perfection. Be careful. Don't be tricked. All right. Theory versus practice. Things sound good. Things look good versus in the field, practically implementing and doing things. Number one. Moon sighting for both commencing and conclusion of the month of Ramadan, as we have previously explained. Are you practically looking for it? How easy is it for everyone to look for it? Is it practical for everybody to look for it? Or is it just more practical for the Muslims to take the international sighting or local sighting? Theory versus practice. Number two, using modern means of technology for looking for the moon, telescopes, electronic satellites, etc. Like we explained. Number three, prayer schedules for suhoor, imsak, and iftar. Time for suhoor, imsak, and traveling, or iftar, traveling by plane. I left New York City, I left JFK, now I'm traveling across the Atlantic Ocean. When is it iftar time? Do I add hours? You're traveling from Europe to JFK, right? It's nighttime, and you're trying to determine when Fajr is. You look out the window, next thing you know, 5 seconds later, boom, the sun is right there in front of your face, literally. يَطْلُبُهُ حَثِيثًا, as Allah says in the Quran. Seeking it, quickly, rapidly. These different modern day issues. Time zones and fast speed traveling and jet lag, as we mentioned. Ear and eye drops. It has nothing to do with our discussion. Inhalers, nasal sprays, throat examinations, OBGYN examinations and procedures, intravenous therapy, IV, has nothing to do with our discussion. And the same applies to theory versus practice, intravenous needles, oxygen masks, eye contacts, breathing tubes, etc. At the end of the day, as we have explained many, many times, and we always try to encourage the people to learn and to study, مَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. This is what they say, غَيْضٌ مِنْ فَيْضٍ. All right, this is يعني إن أول المطر قطرات ثم ينهمر. The rain starts off with a few drops, and then it turns into a torrential storm. So this is nothing more than mental stimulation for you to study more, read more, sharpen up, realize where you're lacking. We're not going to give you all of the answers because we don't have all of the answers ourselves. We don't know everything. We don't understand everything. We don't have the solution to all problems of humanity and the people today. Nor do we ever claim that. Never. We never claim that. But we want to get you to think. We want to stimulate your mind, stimulate your brain, get those juices in your head moving. And you start thinking critically and researching and understanding and opening up different doors. And of course, from one thing, we learn 10,000 things. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow the Ramadan to be a blessed Ramadan and allow the Muslims to unify upon that which is correct, upon the truth, and to set aside their differences and their problems and to be vigilant against the shayateen that want to keep the Muslims separated and divided at all means and by all costs. Wallahu ta'ala alam wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala abdihi wa rasulihi nabiyina wa imamina Muhammad.